Friends, thank you for being here today. We are living through a moment in history that, even a decade ago, would have seemed entirely unimaginable. For generations, we grew up with a fundamental, unspoken truth governing the global world order. The United States of America was the undisputed center of gravity. It was the land of opportunity, the global magnet for ambition, and the ultimate destination for anyone seeking to build a better life. The American dream was not just a national ethos, it was a global export. We, as Canadians, have long stood in the shadow of that towering, often deafening, cultural and economic colossus. We watched their triumphs, we weathered the secondary impacts of their crises, and we quietly accepted our role as the polite, unassuming neighbor to the north. But hold on to your seats, because the geopolitical tectonic plates have shifted, and the world has fundamentally flipped upside down. According to the most comprehensive recent global rankings, including massive multi-year studies surveying hundreds of thousands of professionals across nearly 200 countries, the United States has not just slipped from the top spot, it has plummeted. The nation that once defined global aspiration has fallen to 41st place in global desirability. Let that sink in for a moment. 41st. I want to pause right here and ask you, when did you personally first notice the cracks forming in the American dream? Was there a specific moment or event? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Meanwhile, while Washington has been consumed by the noise of its own internal fractures, Canada has quietly, methodically, and resolutely ascended. We have officially become the world's most desirable country. Today, we are not going to look at superficial headlines. We are going to dig deep into the data, the history, and the geopolitical undercurrents to understand exactly how the Canadian model of pragmatism, rule of law, and quiet competence outmaneuvered American emotional volatility. This is the story of how David didn't just stand up to Goliath. David outthought him, outplanned him, and ultimately took his crown. To understand this monumental shift, we must first recognize that the very metrics of national success have evolved, signaling the definitive end of the American monopoly on the global dream. In the 20th century, global desirability was driven almost exclusively by raw, unbridled capitalism. The United States offered the highest ceiling for individual wealth, and for decades that was enough. If you wanted to make a fortune, you went to New York or Silicon Valley. But the global consensus has profoundly changed. When researchers and economists ask the world's top talent today why they choose to relocate, the number one reason is no longer sheer financial maximization. The new global currency is the quality of life. And this is precisely where the American monopoly began to fracture. The global talent pool, foreign investors, and multinational corporations are no longer lured solely by the promise of untethered wealth if that wealth comes at the cost of personal safety, societal stability, and peace of mind. The world has watched, with a mix of fascination and horror, the divergence of two distinct North American models. On one side of the 49th parallel, the United States has projected an image of deepening political division, social fracture, and policymaking driven by emotional populism. They have seen the Capitol riots, the unpredictable executive orders, the stark ideological warfare, and a society that seems perpetually at war with itself. On our side of the border, the world sees something entirely different. They see a nation that has maintained its historical posture, calm, deliberate, and fiercely anchored in institutional stability. We do not engage in the loud, performative politics of our southern neighbors. We prefer the quiet dignity of parliamentary procedure, the rigorous application of the law, and an unwavering commitment to empirical data over political theater. For a world exhausted by chaos, the Canadian reality has become vastly more appealing than the American myth. This shifting paradigm brings us to the raw geopolitics of stability versus chaos. In geopolitics, temperament is destiny. In a highly globalized, deeply interconnected economy currently facing hot wars, supply chain disruptions, and shifting international alliances, capital and talent are desperately seeking safe harbors. The ongoing political turbulence in the United States is no longer viewed internationally as a mere domestic issue. It is priced into global markets as a systemic risk. Think about it from the perspective of an international investor or a sovereign wealth fund. When U.S. administrations change, international agreements are torn up, trade pacts are abandoned overnight, and tariffs are wielded like emotional weapons on social media. That level of volatility is a massive economic liability. Herein lies the strategic brilliance of the Canadian approach, the immense, undeniable value of being boring. Our lack of political theater is, in fact, our greatest geopolitical asset. The Canadian approach to governance favors incremental progress, rigorous debate within the strict bounds of the law, and a wholesale rejection of the extreme populism that has infected so much of the Western world. When international allies and global markets look at Ottawa, they do not see a wild card. They see a reliable, mature partner. Furthermore, we have asserted a quiet but ironclad diplomatic and economic independence. By refusing to simply be an echo chamber for Washington's ever-changing foreign policy whims, Canada has insulated itself from the reputational damage the U.S. has suffered globally. When the U.S. alienated its traditional allies over the past decade, Canada stepped in, forging stronger ties with Europe, leaning into the Pacific and acting as a voice of reason. We have proven that we can stand toe-to-toe with the American giant not by shouting louder, but by being the adult in the room. We win with treaties, logic, and an unwavering adherence to international law. Let us transition from geopolitical posturing to the raw economics of sovereignty and regulatory foresight, because this is where the Canadian philosophy truly separates itself from the American experiment. Cast your minds back to the 2008 financial crisis. This was the ultimate stress test of the two national philosophies. The United States, driven by a culture of aggressive deregulation and the pursuit of short-term quarterly profits, allowed its financial institutions to play casino capitalism with the global economy. When the house of cards collapsed, it triggered a global recession. Trillions of dollars of wealth evaporated, and the American taxpayer was forced to bail out the very architects of the disaster. Now look at Canada. During that exact same global meltdown, not a single Canadian bank failed. Not one required a taxpayer bailout. This was not a stroke of luck. It was the direct result of stringent, conservative Canadian regulatory frameworks implemented long before the crisis. Canadian regulators demanded that our banks hold higher capital reserves, lend responsibly, and avoid the toxic assets that destroyed the U.S. market. Wall Street mocked Canadian banks for being boring and stodgy during the boom years. But when the fire started, our boring, stodgy banking fortress was the only one left standing. We prioritized national economic security over reckless corporate speculation, and the world took notes. If you remember watching the 2008 American financial meltdown from the safety of Canada, I'd love to read your experiences in the comments. Did it reinforce your faith in our regulatory system? This foresight has also been our shield in an era of unpredictable American trade wars. We all remember the insult of the U.S. administration slapping arbitrary tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum, absurdly citing national security concerns against their closest ally. How did Canada respond? Not with panic, not with emotional outbursts. We responded with cold, calculated, legal precision. We implemented proportional countermeasures, dollar for dollar, targeting specific American political vulnerabilities. But more importantly, we accelerated our pivot away from American economic dominance. We recognized that relying on a volatile neighbor for 75% of our trade was a strategic vulnerability. So we quietly fortified our economic sovereignty. We championed and ratified the Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement, CETA, with Europe, and the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership, CPTPP, in Asia. We strategically diluted our reliance on the U.S. market, securing access to billions of consumers worldwide. Today, as the world transitions to a green economy, Canada is doing it again. Through strategic, long-term investments in clean technology and the ethical extraction of critical minerals, we are positioning ourselves not just as a hewer of wood and drawer of water, but as an indispensable, reliable node in the future global supply chain. We are future-proofing our economy, while the U.S. energy sector remains heavily politicized and divided. But economic foresight means little without the minds to drive it. If capital is the lifeblood of the global economy, human intellect is its engine. And in this arena, Canada is executing what can only be described as a bloodless coup against the United States for global talent. For decades, the U.S. skimmed the absolute best and brightest minds from every corner of the globe. But in recent years, America has built literal and bureaucratic walls. The U.S. immigration system has devolved into a labyrinth of hostility. A brilliant software engineer from India or a pioneering medical researcher from Europe might spend 5 to 10 years languishing in the U.S. H-1B visa backlog, living in perpetual anxiety, not knowing if they will ever be allowed to call the country home. It is a system designed by politicians who view immigrants as a political liability rather than an economic asset. Canada, observing this colossal American unforced error, fundamentally rewrote the rules of global talent acquisition. We treat immigration not as a charity, but as a hard-nosed, strategic economic imperative. Enter the Express Entry System. This points-based framework is a masterpiece of economic pragmatism. It strips away emotion, politics, and quotas based on nationality. Instead, it evaluates human beings objectively. What is your education? What is your work experience? Do you speak English or French? If you have the skills our economy demands, Canada does not make you wait a decade in the shadows. We invite you in. We give you certainty. We give you a path to citizenship. We are executing a targeted extraction of the world's brightest minds. When that frustrated software engineer realizes they are not wanted in Silicon Valley, they look north. And we welcome them, not just with open arms, but with open markets. This strategy has yielded immense, tangible geopolitical power. Between 2018 and 2023, Toronto attracted more tech professionals than any other city in North America. Let me repeat that. Not San Francisco, not Seattle, not Austin or New York, Toronto. We are witnessing a massive transfer of intellectual wealth. Companies like Shopify, founded by an immigrant, have become global titans. Engineering giants based in Canada are leading the world. By actively courting the talent that the U.S. system neglects, abuses, and turns away, Canada is building deep economic muscle. We are securing our intellectual sovereignty and ensuring that the innovations of the next 50 years happen in our cities, not theirs. Are you seeing this brain gain in your own communities or industries? Drop a comment and let me know if you've noticed this shift in global talent firsthand. To truly understand why the global elite and the middle class alike are choosing Canada, we must reevaluate how we view our social institutions. We must see healthcare and education as the true institutional pillars of national security. In the United States, debates over healthcare and education are framed as ideological battles over socialism versus freedom. This is a profoundly myopic, deeply emotional way to run a country. In Canada, we understand that a nation cannot project strength abroad if its citizens are physically and financially insecure at home. Our universal healthcare system is not merely a bleeding heart social program. It is a foundational pillar of national stability and a massive corporate subsidy that makes our businesses ruthlessly competitive on the global stage. Consider the economic reality of the American healthcare system. It is a system where a single medical emergency, a cancer diagnosis, or a premature birth can routinely lead to personal bankruptcy, even for people with good jobs. Healthcare in the U.S. is tied to employment, creating a workforce that is deeply stressed, risk-averse, and terrified of losing their insurance. Furthermore, American corporations are burdened with staggering premiums to cover their employees, sapping capital that could be used for research, development, or expansion. In contrast, the Canadian model guarantees that a citizenry is protected from financial ruin due to illness. Yes, we are pragmatic people. We acknowledge the challenges. We know there are wait times for elective procedures. We know our system requires constant reform and investment. But when you remove the existential dread of medical bankruptcy from the populace, you foster a highly resilient, entrepreneurial workforce. A Canadian can leave their job to start a new business without the terror of losing access to doctors for their children. Canadian corporations do not shoulder the crushing weight of health insurance premiums, giving them a distinct competitive edge globally. Universal healthcare is, quite simply, superior social engineering and a vital component of our national security. The same pragmatism applies to education. The United States has allowed higher education to become a luxury good, saddling generations of young people with crippling, inescapable debt. An American undergraduate degree can easily exceed $50,000 to $80,000 a year. It is an aristocracy of wealth, not intellect. Canada, conversely, heavily subsidizes its world-class institutions, like the University of Toronto, McGill, and UBC, for its residents. We ensure that our next generation of leaders, scientists, and innovators is determined by merit, hard work, and intellect, not by the size of their parents' bank accounts. By investing in the minds of our citizens, we guarantee that our national IQ remains sharp, competitive, and ready to outmaneuver international rivals. Now, as seasoned, thinking adults looking toward the future, we must ground our analysis in reality to chart the true Canadian way forward. A sober assessment requires acknowledging our own internal vulnerabilities. We are not a utopia, and no serious Canadian would claim we are. We face severe, pressing challenges. The hyperinflation of our housing markets, particularly in urban centers like Toronto and Vancouver, is threatening the financial stability of our younger generations. We are experiencing the acute strain on infrastructure, roads, and public services driven by our rapid population growth. The cost of living is a daily pressure on working families from coast to coast. However, the critical difference between Canada and the United States lies not in the absence of problems, but in the nature of those problems and the mechanisms we use to solve them. The United States is currently fighting structural, existential battles over the very nature of its democracy. They are fighting over fundamental rights, the legitimacy of their elections, and the basic fabric of their society. They are experiencing the structural decay of an empire that has lost its unifying purpose. Canada's problems, conversely, are the growing pains of a highly desirable, rapidly expanding, successful nation. Our housing crisis exists precisely because millions of the world's most successful people desperately want to live here. Our infrastructure is strained because our economy is absorbing talent at an unprecedented rate. We are not tearing our country down. We are struggling with the immense weight of building it up. And the overarching strategy, spearheaded by Canadian economic leadership, is focused on the right metrics: sustainability, stability, and smart immigration. It is a long-term, rational blueprint designed to build an economy that serves the broader public interest and stands the test of time. This contrasts sharply with the American model of growth at any cost, a model that has generated massive wealth for a select elite while hollowing out their middle class and destabilizing their society. We are playing the long game. Before we draw to a close, we must examine the very nature of how global power is projected in this new century, because this is where the Canadian strategy executes its most brilliant and subtle maneuver yet. For 70 years, the United States has relied almost exclusively on hard power, the blunt, overwhelmingly expensive, and deafening force of $1 trillion military apparatus. They attempt to police the globe, they issue aggressive unilateral sanctions, and they demand compliance through the explicit threat of force or economic ruin. But the rules of the geopolitical game have profoundly changed. You cannot bomb a supply chain disruption. You cannot send an aircraft carrier to fix a fractured trade agreement or cure a public health crisis. The heavy-handed, coercive tactics of the 20th century are increasingly obsolete, and more importantly, they are exhausting to the nation wielding them. The American empire is financially, politically, and psychologically fatigued by its own relentless aggression. Canada, by contrast, has mastered the architecture of modern soft power and strategic resource sovereignty. We are playing a completely different game, one fought and won in courtrooms, trade tribunals, and corporate boardrooms, rather than on battlefields. We are winning without firing a single shot. Look at the critical minerals required for the next generation of global infrastructure. The cobalt, lithium, and rare earth elements absolutely essential for electric vehicles, advanced computing, and aerospace. The United States is currently in a state of strategic panic, waking up to the reality that they spent decades outsourcing their supply chains to geopolitical rivals out of a desire for cheap labor. Canada, however, is sitting on one of the largest, most secure, and ethically extractable reserves of these critical materials on the planet. But we are not simply acting as a convenient quarry for American factories. We are dictating the terms of engagement. We are utilizing our rigorous environmental standards, our robust legal frameworks, and our partnerships with indigenous communities to build an impenetrable legal fortress around our resources. When Washington, desperate to secure its high-tech supply chains, looks north, they do not find a subservient neighbor willing to hand over the keys on demand. They find a highly sophisticated, unyielding negotiating partner. We force them to the table, and we use international law, airtight contracts, and our undeniable leverage to secure terms that guarantee Canadian sovereignty and prosperity. We outlawyer the giant, and we do it with a polite smile. I'm very curious to hear your analytical take on this. Do you think our government is being firm enough with Washington regarding our critical resources? Share your geopolitical verdict in the comments. This approach extends to our entire diplomatic footprint. When European allies or developing nations seek partners for massive infrastructure or energy projects, the United States often arrives with a heavy-handed list of political demands and the ever-present threat of future sanctions, depending entirely on which way the volatile political winds happen to be blowing in Washington that week. Canada arrives differently. We bring world-class engineering firms. We bring the quiet, massive financial backing of our unshakable banking sector. And we bring a commitment to mutual, lawful prosperity without the exhausting political circus. We are quietly winning massive global influence simply by being the reliable, rational adult in the room. We do not need a military base in every time zone to project our strength. We project undeniable strength through our unwavering adherence to the rule of law and our strategic control over the resources the world desperately needs. We are perfectly content to let the Americans exhaust their treasury and their national psyche trying to loudly police the globe, while we quietly, methodically secure the world's wealth and our own future through intellect, diplomacy, and ironclad contracts. Friends, let us look at the board as it stands today and recognize the quiet, undeniable power of pragmatism. Canada's ascension to the top of the Global Desirability Index and our quiet usurpation of the American dream is not a fluke. It is not an accident of geography, nor is it the result of aggressive self-promotion. It is the direct, undeniable result of choosing intellectual rigor over rhetorical bluster. It is the triumph of strict financial regulation over corporate greed. It is the victory of social responsibility and cohesion over extreme, divisive individualism. We watched the loud, aggressive, and often chaotic populism that has come to define the modern United States, and we deliberately, systematically chose a different path. In a fractured world desperate for balance, certainty, and safety, Canada has proven a profound geopolitical truth. A nation does not need to be the loudest, most aggressive presence in the room to lead it. We have fought for our sovereignty not with military bluster, but with airtight trade agreements and unparalleled banking regulations. We have defeated the American talent monopoly not by building walls, but by opening smart, strategic doors. We have stayed true to who we are. We have kept our heads down, managed our resources wisely, protected our citizens, and offered the world a sanctuary of stability governed by the firm, uncompromising rule of law. The United States may always have the louder voice, the larger military, and the dramatic headlines. Let them have it. The drama is exhausting them, and it is exhausting the world. While they fight amongst themselves, we are building the future. The true North has emerged not just as a polite alternative to the American dream. Through sheer pragmatism, unyielding stability, and quiet, relentless competence, we have become its highly successful successor. And that, my friends, is a victory we have earned and one we must fiercely protect. Before we wrap up, I want to turn this over to you. Can Canada hold on to this #1 spot, or do you see new challenges on the horizon that we aren't preparing for? Leave your detailed analysis in the comments below. I read as many as I can, and I deeply value your perspective. Thank you.